planning ahead. In attempting to carry out a difficult task, we should not only ask for God's help, but also carefully and diligently plan ahead. Here now is Dr. Gene Getz.
When Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, he decided to assess the damage before he revealed why he was there. And that's what we read right here in Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 11 and 13. After I arrived in Jerusalem, and of course it was a very long trip, he got there, and notice what happened. After I arrived in Jerusalem and had been there 3 days, I got up at night and took a few men with me. I didn't tell anyone what my God had laid on my heart to do for Jerusalem. Now, we don't know what happened the first 3 days. Perhaps he met with just a few individuals that he felt he could trust. Maybe his brother was there, the brother that came and obviously reported on all of this when he was still serving the king, King Artaxerxes. But he says, during these 3 days, and the implication is, I strategized, I thought, maybe he prayed, I'm sure he prayed, but he knew he had a difficult situation. And he knew that he could not communicate with the people right away while he was there, because they were demoralized. What he's going to do is extremely wise because of that demoralization. They were discouraged. They were disgraced. And so consequently, he took all of that into consideration because he knew that if he revealed to the people why he was there, they couldn't handle it. They would be in a negative mindset right from the very beginning. And he didn't want to set that stage. And so consequently, we read that he got up at night and he took just a few men with him. May have been men that came with him, men that were there that he could trust, but he knew that he shouldn't tell anyone why he was there. And notice he also says, the only animal I took was the one animal I was riding. In other words, the other guys had to walk because he didn't want to make a scene. In fact, you get a group of mules out there, or donkeys, and they'd start braying and create some kind of situation, and he didn't want to create that. He was being very, very, very cautious. He continues with his testimony. He says, I went out at night through the valley gate towards the Serpent's Well and the Dung Gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. If you go to Jerusalem today, you go to the old city, you'll see that there are 8 gates, basically, which is quite representative of what was true way back here in Nehemiah's day. There are some changes, there's some identification situations that are different, but these were gates that were there in the wall. And so he inspected not only the walls, but he looked at all these gates that had been broken down and actually set on fire. He continues, because here's a significant thing. While he was there doing that inspection, he developed a plan. You don't see this plan until a little bit later we get to chapter 3, but he's got his sketch pad. He's making notes. He is probably consulting with the guys that were with him, saying, look at this, look at that, look at this, look at that. Here's what we got to do. Here's how we can do this. So he's out there doing the work. Now he continues in verse 16, the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. For I had not yet told the Jews, generally speaking. Then he gets specific. The priests, I hadn't told them, the nobles, the officials, or the rest of those who would be doing the work. The reason he didn't tell them was because he needed to encourage them in order to respond. And he knew that he had to share with them that he was not there just as a visionary, but he was there and he had a plan. And here's what we can do. I mean, it's an incredible illustration of strategic planning. So I said to them, You see the trouble we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned down. Come, let's rebuild Jerusalem's wall so that we will no longer be a disgrace, which is the word, by the way, that he received from his brother. Remember, when his brother came to him there in the king's palace and said, our people are in disgrace. And so he's identifying that. But at the same time, not only did he reveal a plan, and I'm not sure, I'm speculating, I don't know how much of the plan that he revealed, but I can assume he revealed some of that plan. But the capstone for that plan was when he said, I told them how the gracious hand of my God had been on me and what the king had said to me. He walked them through that whole process. Evidently, told them how he had prayed, how he had fasted, how the king had responded, how God's hand was on him, what the king said, what can I do for you? How he told them. The king responded, gave him letters, told him all of that information. Why? Because he's building their confidence. He's trying to dig them out of this mire of discouragement. And so they said, as a result of this, and it's implied that all of this was communicated, they said, let's start rebuilding. They had developed courage because we read, and they were encouraged to do this good work. It didn't just happen because he said, hey, I'm here to rebuild the walls. Come join me. He knew that wouldn't work. So you see some incredible wisdom here in relationship to this situation. You know, I couldn't help but think of what Jesus said in one of his stories, and I'm kind of wondering if maybe Jesus was thinking about Nehemiah when he told this story. By the way, Jesus would have known all about the Old Testament. He would have understood everything in the Old Testament, obviously, because of who he was. But he told a story in Luke 14. He said, for which of you, wanting to build a tower, doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Now, he's using, obviously, a different illustration and specifics in the illustration, but the dynamics are similar here. Because Nehemiah knew that he had to plan. He had to look at it. Because if he were going to complete this project, he had to do his homework. And Jesus is saying that anyone who's going to build has to do his homework, count the cost. Otherwise, Jesus said, after he has laid the foundation, and here Jesus is simply saying you can't think in terms of just laying a foundation. You got to think of what you're going to build, how much it's going to cost, the whole process, the whole ball of wax. Otherwise, after he's laid the foundation and cannot finish it, all the onlookers will begin to make fun of him, saying, this man started to build and wasn't able to finish. Again, the details are different, but the dynamics are similar, because you're going to see as we look ahead in this story that there were those onlookers who made fun of him, who tried to demoralize Nehemiah by making fun of him. And so Jesus, I believe, is giving us a beautiful illustration of what Nehemiah did, what he did in the planning process. And so Nehemiah came to Jerusalem, in summary, one goal in mind, one purpose, to rebuild those walls. And he didn't want to fail. Nor did he want God's people to be a laughingstock. And so consequently, he blended prayer and trust and diligent human effort in tackling this task. This is just the beginning of the task. So here's a question for reflection and response. Why is it important to blend prayer and planning in various situations? I would say in most situations in our lives, because it's God's will. It's illustrated throughout the Scriptures. And it's true. Even in our communication process, and I have an experience I just had recently where I went to a seminar to speak to a group of elders and leaders, quite a large number. And in speaking to them, I knew there were certain challenges. Now, I knew what I wanted to present. I wanted to present the biblical story on eldership. I wanted to unfold the whole story. I wanted them to see what God's plan was in the New Testament. I wanted them to be able to interact with God's plan. But I wanted them to interact on how to apply that and how to assess their own situation and how to change form or structure that they needed to change to be in harmony with God's supercultural principles. But I also knew that there were certain challenges in the process. I knew ahead of time there were certain questions that I had to face, questions I really didn't understand. I had not met most of these men before. So I was going into a situation where I had general knowledge, but there was a lot of specific information that I didn't have, that I didn't know. And so consequently, one of the things that I did was to really specifically pray, and I did this also with the senior pastor and spiritual leader, is to say, Lord, help us with this process. Help me to be sensitive in the process as we unfold the story, as we interact, as we talk. Lord, help me to say the right things. Yes, I had a plan on what I wanted to do. But I also knew that there were a lot of things I didn't know that I might be able to say to help in this situation. The marvelous thing is, in looking back on that weekend, I saw the Lord unfold situations. I saw the Lord speaking to individuals in a way that I could not have planned it. And it was exciting to see that. Now, that's just a simple illustration. I'm not rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. I certainly wasn't taking on a task like Nehemiah. But the fact is that the principle applies in that situation. So let me restate the principle. In attempting to carry out a difficult task, we should not only ask for God's help, but also carefully and diligently plan ahead.